Hello and welcome everyone to We'll Be Right Back, the future of hospitality. On We'll Be Right Back, we interview people from every corner of the service and hospitality industry, as well as representatives from organizations providing relief and resources as we learn how to manage and settle into this new reality after COVID-19. I am your host, Greg Tilt. Today I am joined by Howie Kaplan, owner of Howlin Wolf here in New Orleans and manager of the Grammy Award-winning Rebirth Brass Band. Howie, thank you so much for coming on the show. Can you please introduce yourself and Howlin Wolf and all that good stuff?
Pleasure. Thanks for having me on, Greg. So the Howlin Wolf is a music club. We're in our 31st year. And as of October 1st, I'll have been with the club for 20 years. Over the years, we've helped develop and help put together acts such as the Rebirth Brass Band, the Grammy-nominated Hot 8 Brass Band, Big Sam's Funky Nation, Trombone Shorty. We were lucky enough to be the first for some pretty major acts as well. Casey Musgraves and Keith Urban both got their first starts in New Orleans here at the Howlin Wolf. We also have a bar and grill called The Den, and that's been open for about 15 years.
Fantastic. Yeah, I've spent many a nights at the Howlin Wolf, whether it's events, whether it's bands. You actually let a buddy of mine and I grab some shots for a music video there, letting us fully utilize your lighting and everything too. You've just been a great pillar here in the city. I imagine everyone I know has been there at some point or another.
Well, if they haven't, they need to come out. And as we go through all this, we have not closed a day yet.
Great to hear. I'm glad y'all been staying busy. So in that vein, can you discuss a little bit of the early weeks leading up to COVID-19? Tell us a bit about what was going on, the discussions you were having and all that.
So like everybody else, we kind of started to see the writing on the wall, as other parts of the country were shutting down. The San Francisco Bay Area had, I believe, 6 or 7 counties all shutting down. So we were kind of taking a look to see exactly what that was going to mean for us. We had been through Katrina, and one of the things we recalled was Drago's and the Satanovich family. After Katrina, they had started doing this thing in their parking lot at the Drago's in Fat City. They were feeding people. There weren't any restaurants open. There were very few stores open. They were picking up stuff in Baton Rouge, and I was helping as part of that. And they were putting out hundreds and hundreds of meals, and it was simple stuff: a rice dish, a pasta dish, something inexpensive that could feed a bunch of people. And that was one of the first thoughts that came into my mind is, our focus, my life for the past 2 decades has been about taking care of New Orleans musicians, giving them a place to play, helping them wherever we could. And I think we've got a pretty solid reputation of doing that. And so my first thought was, how can we take care of the musicians? So we started reaching out to different organizations, ended up with the New Orleans Musicians Clinic. Erica and Bethany Boltman over there are pillars of the community. If you want to talk about pillars, they spent the last 23 years taking care of musicians. And we came up with a system that helped us take care of not only musicians, but hospitality workers, first responders. We don't sit there and ask for your paycheck. We don't ask what band you're playing in or what hotel or restaurant you work at. But the focus was going to be on the people in our community, in our area, people that we generally work with. And so we started doing a feeding program. We're in our 9th week now, I believe. We started right as everything was shutting down. And that's kind of been our focus for the last couple of months. We should be right at about 10,000 meals. The biggest thing of this is not just the meals that we're giving these folks, but also giving them access to a bunch of information. We've helped quite a few people get access to unemployment insurance that didn't think that they were able to apply, help with SNAP, help with housing vouchers, help getting them on Medicaid, because right now these people aren't working. We understand that this situation is going to get worse. So that's really been our focus coming in. So the adjustments we're making are more based on the fact that there's not going to be 300 people willing to stand in a room anytime soon to see a band like Rebirth or a Big Sam or, George Porter. So we've been open every day. We've been doing the takeout food. We opened last week for some inside. We're very careful about that. A lot of my staff right now are volunteering to help us with the cause, which is kind of nice to have them come in and they believe in what we're doing. And I've been very lucky to have a fantastic staff that really understands all these pieces.
Yeah, it's really interesting because you're kind of a different guest for this show. We're very hospitality focused, but obviously service and hospitality is kind of a, not muddy term, but kind of a broad, malleable term. And if anyone thinks of New Orleans, 2 things usually come to mind. It's our culinary and it's our musicians. And I think part of why I really wanted to have you on the show, aside from the fact that, you run a great business and you're just a good person, Cole reached out to us and said, hey, you should have Howie on. He's doing really interesting work. And while this isn't quote unquote restaurant industry, hospitality industry, you're just so adjacent to it. The fact that you're even focused on food as a service back to groups with your things like meals for musicians that you do, right? All these initiatives that you have that are focused around providing food and services, but this particular focus on musicians is just really interesting. And I think your work is so important here in the city right now.
Well, I'm going to agree with you, of course, just because it's what we're doing and it's kind of where we've been. But understand, we like to call them culture bears, and I think when people use that term here, they generally like to refer to, the Mardi Gras Indians, the musicians, the brass bands. But I think that term really extends way far beyond that. You're talking to people working in the hotels, that are parking the cars, that are a sous chef in a restaurant, the guy washing all of them are culture bearers because the reason people come here, that millions of people come to New Orleans, and we hope you all come back, is that you get a certain sense of the city. And if you've been going around the city the last couple of weeks and the last couple of months and seeing it kind of dead, it's kind of like this, it's almost like a mausoleum, and it's waiting for, somebody to come in and open it up. And the real exciting thing this last week was watching more and more people go out, the bike riders and people in cars and going into the quarter and going uptown. But these culture bears are the ones that really give it its sense of purpose, give it its life. And we can have really great views of the Mississippi River. We can have this really fantastic architecture in all the different wards and all across the city. But without the people, it's really it's an empty building. And so that's what really gives the city its flavor. And so when we talk about the people that are serving us, it's nice that we get the chance to serve them.
Absolutely. And one thing you talked about that stuck out to me on your call was you expressed concern about when benefits, right? In July, this expanded unemployment that's supplemented by the federal government is going to expire, obviously, unless bills change. I know there's a lot of evolving situation with that. You also just talked about how we just missed out on, it doesn't really matter what industry you're in. In New Orleans, the spring and the fall are almost always the hot times for us, right?
Absolutely.
That late February to mid-April, some summer festivals, but summer, pretty much the city goes to sleep. And then in the fall, we pick up again. And not only did a lot of musicians and people, especially just your gig workers, your hourly workers, all these people miss out on that prime spring opportunity, but we're about to enter the slow season. I know myself, being in the film industry, that is a concern of mine. Could you talk a little bit about musicians who are stuck in the middle kind of this summer slow season coming this way? What are some of the barriers you're seeing in their way? What are some of the solutions maybe you could see? What do you think we need to do for these culture bearers?
That's a great question. It's a big issue for everyone. I was on a conference call the other day, and they were talking about best food safety practices, and it was a really fascinating call, and it was fun to listen. But they started getting into an argument about straws, and I'm sitting there. It's kind of like being on the Titanic as it's sinking, and you're sitting there rearranging deck chairs. The bigger issue is we count on March, April, and May to pay for June, July, August, and September. People don't come here because it's just ungodly hot. It's not a comfortable time to come to a city like New Orleans. People that live here have kind of gotten used to that, but they kind of buckle down too. It's, you'll stand in line, but only if you get a chance to get a cold drink at the end of that line, or a snowball or whatever it is that you're getting. And, they're having arguments about the 25% and the 50%. And we're a part of that too. We're a music club, but we're also a restaurant. We sell quite a bit of food, and we have for many, many years. And capacity isn't the issue, because you can be at 100% capacity, but that doesn't mean you're going to have 100% full on every seating. And it's going to be interesting to see, because we don't have a manufacturing base of any kind. We don't have a financial services industry. We don't have a tech corridor. We have none of that. And so what we count on is people coming here. And I think that needs to be the focus right now, is figuring out how we're going to get people here, how we're going to make them feel comfortable coming here. I still believe in all those practices. I'm not dismissing them. I think they're very important, and we're very much involved in those conversations, because the last thing we want is for anyone to get sick. Anybody that's in the hospitality industry will tell you that your number one goal is to make sure that they're safe. You want them to enjoy it second. But we need to keep having these conversations, not just about saving restaurants, which already have an incredibly high failure rate, but we need to think about the musicians who are working in those restaurants, the musicians who are working, at the Airbnbs, that are working, driving an Uber, that are doing all of these different things because historically, they just don't make enough money. They're all working below the poverty line. And we're not just talking about the big names, but where's that next trombone shorty going to come from? Where's the next Galactic going to come from? It's going to come from New Orleans. So we're working with different groups and we're trying to figure out legislative fixes to that. And the neat thing about having these conversations has been people around America love New Orleans. And I think we have a really fantastic opportunity to tell people that we know how to do this, that we know how to do it the right way. And I think the story that we're telling is very different than the story that anybody else can tell. I think we're all in a world of hurt, but I think New Orleans is more in danger of losing her identity without that help.
A question just kind of came to mind here. One thing we think a lot about with this show is how New Orleans is not the only place obviously hit. We're not the only hospitality industry suffering, but we're kind of a unique city and a unique story of hospitality. The role it plays in our culture, as you said, these culture bearers, it's such a huge anchor for us. It's kind of a foundational pillar. What do you think are some of the lessons that we can be teaching others right now as we do our response, as, Howlin Wolf takes on its thing and you've got Chef's Brigade out there and all these different groups working together? What do you think are some of the things we're learning that are beads of wisdom we can pass on to other folks?
Well, it's funny you mentioned Chef's Brigade because we're actually a part of that. And we're constantly talking to each other about ways we can help each other. It's not about, I think the biggest lesson that they can learn anywhere else is New Orleans has learned, especially after Katrina, that we have to work together. And there is no turf here at this point. We're all fighting for the same thing. And while you may talk about restaurants that are like, all right, well, another one opens up down the street, I don't want to fight it in my base or bar next to each other. I think of any place, New Orleans watches out for each other very, very well. So when I'm having these discussions with other folks that are doing similar things, my thought isn't, wow, they're taking my thunder. My thought is, how can I help them help more people? And that seems to be a running theme with everybody we're doing. We're consistently getting new partners in that are like, what can we do to help? We have a waiting list of volunteers that want to help us deliver meals. And I know that happens in other places, and other places have good souls and good hearts. But here we seem to work better together. The restaurant industry in particular, every time something happens, they figure out a way to get together. The IRC thing they're doing, what that Mason's doing, that all these people are working and trying to figure out ways to help each other, knowing full well that many of them will not make it through this. So if you got a good lesson to teach people that are hearing this outside of New Orleans, nobody is stronger in taking care of our neighbors and taking care of our community and taking care of each other than New Orleans.
All this talk of collaboration, right? All these partnerships you're working on and stuff reminds me of a line from your phone call where you said, and I'm kind of paraphrasing, the Howlin Wolf is basically running like a nonprofit right now. So could you kind of elaborate a bit more about that? I feel like that's kind of a natural segue here in your talk of collaboration and working kind of not at cross purposes, but more working in sync with people who could be very well viewed as competitors.
So it's again, it's kind of funny you say that, because the joke we have around here is that I have a new job working for a nonprofit. The next question is, oh, really? Who is that? I say the Howlin Wolf, and of course people laugh because it's a funny joke, but the reality is, it takes a lot of money to run a restaurant, to run a music club, to run a bar, and even with assistance, we count on that money. And every now and again, when I have to fill out another form and I have to sit there and look at how much different our revenue stream is now, and how much it's off, and how much it'll continue to be off. And I can't imagine any scenario where we're going to be profitable anytime in the near future. We're hoping to get back to normal in the spring of 21, which is, it's a year away. And anybody that thinks otherwise, I would love to. I'm the optimist in the room. I believe in people. I believe in hard work. I believe that my dad has a saying. He says, it's amazing how people who work really hard have really good luck. And I 100% believe in that. But at this point, this is where we are. And I can either close the doors and try to weather the storm and come out on the other side, or I can sit here and fight for it. So that's kind of where we are in running a nonprofit, so to speak, because we're not a nonprofit. We do work with a lot of them. And it's kind of neat to continue to develop relationships with people that I may not have developed relationships with. We all have the same goal, and it's going to be interesting to see, when we get on the other side of this.
Are there any new services or collaborations or things you're doing, new initiatives with Howlin Wolf that you think you're going to carry forward after all of this? Things that, for instance, Christina Balzabri with Levy, she told us about they've been doing these CSAs, community sourced agriculture, right? They've been doing these CSA boxes out of their space. And now she said it's going to be a permanent corner, most likely. They're already talking about how they're going to continue this farmer collaboration out of their space, even when people are kind of back to quote unquote normal or whatever the new normal, as we all say, is. What are y'all possibly carrying forward or things that you want to stick with?
What we've been doing is a lot of like everybody else, the Zoom calls and the conference calls and the meetings. That's something that's been fantastic. I think that those collaborations will continue. But the thing is, I think the reason we're doing well now, and I say we're doing well because we're actually able to help people and everybody's got to focus, is that a lot of these things were in place already. These were things where you're already looking at the community and saying, what can I do to help? You talked about, having been to the Wolf before for different events and meetings. I would imagine you've been here for a fundraiser or two, just because we've done so many of them over the last 20 years.
So you're more like tapping into an existing ecosystem y'all have already been using.
Right. This isn't a new focus. And I don't think it's a new focus in New Orleans. I think people are just taking what we were already doing and putting it into better pieces. It's the networks that already existed. It's the institutions that already existed. We didn't create a nonprofit. We went straight to the musicians clinic. They've got 2,500 to 3,000 people that are in their database that they consistently help. That's a part of something that's already existed. I don't think there's anything new. We're not recreating the wheel here. We're not recreating how we help each other. I think it's a big part of who we are and how we're going to move forward. I have no doubt about that.
Yeah, when we first started the show, we had this debate too. We had kind of these, when it was like a quarter baked idea, we had these ideas of like, oh, maybe we should take donations and then we'll help bring it to organizations. And then we saw Chef's Brigade, and we saw Mino, we saw these groups doing stuff, and we went, too many cooks. Let's instead highlight what already exists. And I think that's been such an important lesson. A lot of these early conversations we had on the show were people saying like, we wanted to make food, but these people want to make food too. And we all want to help service workers, and we want to help law enforcement and firefighters and all these great people who are taking care of us, emergency workers and whatnot. But if we all show up and give them lunch at the same time, that's not really helpful. And so it's an interesting coordinator.
I definitely agree with that. And again, in any conversation I've had with anybody else doing what we're doing, like Isaac and Amanda at Toops, they just wanted to do something nice. And now it's become a focus of what they're doing as well. Same thing with the guys at Blue Oak across the street. They're doing fantastic work. And so this isn't something new. This is what people do. And I think the best part of this is that we're establishing new relationships. So as it gets worse, because it's gonna get worse. I wish I could tell you, and again, I'm the optimist in the room. I'm the happy guy saying, the sun's going to shine all day. But the reality is we know these times are hard, and these times are going to be harder than others. And at some point you're going to start seeing, and I'm sure you're already seeing it in your conversations, these places are going to start shutting down. Just because at some point you have to say, okay, is this feasible? Tom Fitzmaurice has his thing, 1,500 restaurants in the New Orleans metro area. We can't support that without the millions of visitors that come in. And so at some point, you're going to have to start seeing that. I think that's going to be where the people are going to need the help. That's where we're going to try to figure out, okay, a lot of the places stopped doing family meals last Friday, and we saw an uptick this week in the meals we were giving away. Just because there are certain people that count on us. One of our regulars last Friday, she came in and she was standing there and she had this weird look on her face. She said, are you guys done now? Because, Saturday was the opening. And we're like, no, we're here for the long haul, at least through September. And then we'll figure it out from there. She sat down and just started crying because that's the meal she's getting right now. This is her interaction right now. And, hearing from people that are like, man, I never would have been on Medicaid. I never would have gotten the unemployment if I hadn't gotten the information you guys were doing, because we just didn't think that we qualified. And it's amazing how we're able to get people to that point. But I'm more concerned when that money runs out, when it comes August 1st and it's the middle of summer, which is tradition. I mean, a lot of restaurants shut down for a week, shut down for 2 weeks, and they do their deep clean or they do renovations. Can they afford to do that now? Can they afford to put the dollars in? Can they afford to do any of that? Who knows? And you've got some of these restaurant groups with 600 people, they're reopening and they're hiring 60 people back. 90% of those people are still not working. Same thing with the hotels. We're talking to all these people on a fairly regular basis, and we're looking for some shining light, but it's not there yet. And I think we need to keep fighting that and keep moving it forward.
And to compound all this, Sue Zemanek with Zasu, I feel like I'm just name dropping and doing all of our episode rehashing here. But basically, she talked a lot about how the entire kitchen's going to have to be reorganized. I mean, these ideas of these teams, right? You have someone bringing out bread and then water and then your sommelier. And you're just from a purely practical standpoint and just people's tolerance, people aren't going to want 10 different people constantly hitting their table. They're going to want everything kind of streamlined and shrunk down. And kitchens, like, you just can't have all those people huddled together. The people's tolerance for that, at least temporarily, is going to be non-existent. And so not only are we just trying to keep the restaurants we have, but across the board, this is not a hot take. We are most likely going to see drastic reductions in just the staff sizes. People are just not going to sustain the same level of staff, especially these white tablecloth restaurants.
And again, think about it, that they're selling good food, but they're also selling an experience. And that experience, it's the same thing in the live music industry, same thing in the club industry, same thing in the bar industry. You're selling an experience. And, are you going to want to spend $100 on a meal or $200 on a meal when you don't get that experience as part of it anymore?
Well, think about how laughable it was at first when people first heard the ideas of finishing football in empty stadiums and watching baseball in empty stadiums. And the idea is like, oh my God, like, how does that even, it's kind of a simple solution in a weird way, but it also sounds so absurd. And in the back of everyone's mind is, the games are going to be different. Watching is going to be different. The players on the field are going to feel different. The experience is kind of 50 to 100,000 people screaming in a small space, right? And like, you take that away and you almost have to ask, is it still football, right? Is it still the National Football League? And I think that's a much larger scale version of what we're going to see on a micro scale in all these different restaurants.
I 100% agree with that. And I think there's still things we don't know. And every week there's something new coming out. We went part of a call yesterday with somebody from the DHA, Department of Health and Hospitals, was talking about how they're seeing the transmission from inanimate objects is very, very, very low. That's something new. And I'm glad that they're not broadcasting it, because they're trying to figure out if that's true. So because people were worried about touching their groceries, and when someone comes in with takeout, they're not seeing transmission.
We have Clorox wipes by the front door for whenever groceries or takeout comes in.
And they're saying that you don't need to do that. So we don't know. There's a lot we don't know. There's a lot that's changing on a regular basis. Everybody keeps talking about the vaccine, having a vaccine, and things will change when there's a vaccine. Well, you want to know something? We have a flu vaccine, and every year 60,000 people die. That's, I'm not saying this is the same thing. Obviously they're very different diseases, but at some point we have to determine, what are we going to do and how are we going to approach this? I believe, and I'm one of the only ones, I think, at this point, that it's going to be when they're able to treat this better, to where it becomes more chronic and less fatal. Instead of being on a ventilator, you're on oxygen. Instead of being intubated, you're figuring, they're doing things with the prone position is one of the things I've read. A little knowledge is dangerous, I guess, but I think the doctors are doing everything they can. I think the researchers are doing everything they can. I think we need to believe in science. And as that's going to be the determining factor. I can't sit here and again, another conference call yesterday, and, people are talking about the things they're going to do in venues. Are we going to take temperatures? Are we going to get this equipment or that equipment? And we just don't know right now. And so I think the restaurants are kind of going through the same thing. I think you need to be over careful. But again, how does that take the experience, not just, for your guests, but how does that take your experience for your staff? If it's a very high stress environment where you're constantly worrying about, okay, have I done this? Am I doing this? It really takes away from that experience, and how many people are going to want to be a part of that?
Absolutely. Well, Howie, we kind of hit a lot of the stuff I wanted to touch on. Is there anything we didn't discuss that you really wanted to hit?
There's a lot of organizations doing a lot of things. One is a group called NIVA, which is the National Independent Venue Association. There's a hashtag, Save Our Stages. There's currently a letter that's going through that has already been signed on the House by over 200 members, and it's bipartisan. Another one that Senator Cassidy signed, going through the Senate. He signed it yesterday, and we're hoping that both senators get on board on that. We're working hard to make sure that these independent venues are there. We're working hard to make certain that everything we're doing is about saving the music. It's such an important part of what we do here in New Orleans. The food is fantastic. And one of the things I was seeing on Open Table or one of the other presentations, I mean, these Zoom calls are never ending, and some of them are mind numbing, but they talked about how during festival season that the numbers increase. And they know, an Open Table, they can tell you if it either came from New Orleans or it came from somewhere else. And it's amazing the difference you have in out of town reservations. And these are reservations that are coming in weeks in advance, not the week of. People plan on coming to New Orleans. They plan where they're going to eat. They plan what shows they're going to see. It's an experience coming here. And, we need to keep that in mind. We need to keep our eye on the goal, which is to get people back here, to tell the story of New Orleans, not just through the musicians and the music clubs, but through the restaurants, through the hospitality industry, figuring out ways. There was an article in the Dallas Morning News this morning about a woman who took her check to pay musicians to go play for the hospital in New Orleans East. Those are fantastic stories, and we need to keep telling them because that's not something that's happening in other cities. We can sit there and talk about Houston or Dallas or Atlanta, and I'm sure there are all great stories going on there, but the people in New Orleans and the emails that we're getting just supporting us, the people that are doing things. We had Todd Parkmore, who's a leader of a band called Big Head Todd the Monsters out of Colorado, found out what we were doing and did a live stream for us and raised close to $5,000. And you think about all the meals we can do with that. And that's the money we're putting aside, knowing what's going to happen. But we have some fantastic partners. I mean, the New Orleans Fish House, we've got a bunch of different suppliers, Leidenheimer and Camellia, all these fantastic classic New Orleans businesses that are really stepping up and doing everything they can to help everybody. If we keep our focus on that, I think we'll be fine. It's going to be a very, very different city at the end of this. It's going to be a very, very different restaurant scene. It's going to be a very, very different bar scene, a very, very different live music scene. And we just need to keep concentrating on everything we can do to save the soul of each one of those.
Howie, I couldn't put it better than that. We really appreciate you coming on. This was such a great conversation. Before we wrap, of course, though, can you please tell us where can people find you? Give us those shameless plugs.
The howlinwolf.com is the website for us, but we've also got a Meals for Musicians GoFundMe. It's got some great information about what we're doing and the changes that are going about. Again, please go to the hashtag Save Our Stages. It's every single independent venue in New Orleans is a part of this. The IRC, which is, they're doing a lot of great work. Don't just support us, the Howlin Wolf. Make sure you're going out supporting. Tell people around the country what's going on. They know what's happening in their cities, and as things open up, we're going to see some changes, but they need to know what's going on in New Orleans. How, for the past 3 or 4 days, we haven't had a death here in Orleans Parish from COVID, which means the people here are wearing their masks, they're washing their hands. But by the way, why wasn't everybody washing their hands before? Sorry, bad joke. And of course, I've got plenty of toilet paper. Doesn't everybody at this point?
I was going to say, I feel like that's going to be one of those weird idiosyncrasies that people carry for it's going to be a generational thing, or kids be like, why do we have a closet dedicated to toilet paper? It's like, you have no idea.
Because you never know what's going to happen,
It's not a problem until you're stranded.
Well, there's so many fantastic stories. Go out in your community, go out. And I'm not going to tell you just to go out and have a meal until you're comfortable doing that. I'm not going to tell you to go out and see a show. But when it comes time, be ready to support the people around you if you're able to. Take a look at these restaurants, take a look at the workers, and figure out how you can become part of the solution instead of, I really wish I'd done that. And I have so much faith in the people in New Orleans, and so much faith in my staff and the musicians and all the other, club and restaurant owners. People are busting their butts every day to try to figure out a way to work around this. And I'm just humbled to be a part of all that.
Well, as always, y'all, we will have a link to Meals for Musicians, their GoFundMe, in the show notes. So please make use of that. It's a great way to contribute if you're a little more gun shy about stepping out there. I know a lot of us are. So as Howie said, find other ways to contribute.
I appreciate it. Thank you very much, Greg.
Thank you so much, Howie. You have a good one.
You too.
Thank you so much for listening to We'll Be Right Back, the future of hospitality. Each episode, we will be highlighting a different organization contributing to the relief effort here in New Orleans. This episode, we would like to highlight the Made in New Orleans Foundation. Mino envisions a New Orleans hospitality industry that leads the world in growing, supporting, and financing the success of people of color. They use a multidisciplinary approach to address and eliminate disparities facing hospitality professionals of color. In response to COVID-19, Mino is providing immediate emergency financial aid and resources, supporting career and business recovery, and providing online programming to amplify the voices of hospitality professionals of color. To learn more, head on over to minofoundation.org. That's MINO foundation.org. We'll Be Right Back is produced by me, Greg Tilton. My co-producers are Barry Schwartz of My House Events and Elizabeth Tilton of Oyster Sunday. Barry and Elizabeth are offering incredible resources and services during this time through their New Orleans-based businesses, as well as collecting and sharing various initiatives by other individuals and organizations. All of these are linked in the show description, so please make sure to check them out. You can follow us on Twitter for the latest updates and to let us know what's up, @RightBackNola. Please also consider leaving a review for us on whatever podcast platform you fancy. It helps us know what you think, and it helps people find the show. Our cover art was created by Eugenie McClellan. Our show's music was produced by Sarisu. We have links to their work in the show notes, so give them some love.